All right, here we go. Back again, Chris, for another episode of the MedTech Jam Session. I'm Mike Donahue.
Christmas.
Yeah, it is. Happy Christmas, as they say in the UK.
Yeah.
So how's it going, Chris?
Going well. It's good to be getting toward the end of 25 here. And a lot of great things, a lot of things that still working themselves out as it relates to our space, especially. But I think 26 is going to be a revealing year, and 27, I'll put it as a finally back to execution.
Well, let's see. We should maybe have a segment at some point where we put some bets down and on our predictions.
We've had some of that before, me and you. That's good. That's good.
We should do that. We should definitely do that. Well, we're excited today. As always, we're going to feature another great entrepreneur, founder, CEO. David Jansen from Sale Fusion is going to hang out with us for a bit. But first, Chris, let's talk a little bit about, let's sort of set the table, pardon the Thanksgiving/Christmas pun, on what's happening in the spine industry in 2025 as we go into 2026. To your point, a lot has happened in 25. It sounds like you're predicting more is going to happen in 26 and a lot's going to happen in 27. Talk about a little bit about, as particularly as we set the table for David, kind of what you're seeing in the spine market today.
Yeah, I can tell you, Mike, that, I love the shift that has started a couple years ago and is continuing to shift, because spine has been sleepy, in my opinion, for the many years I was at Medtronic, and the years since then, it was sleepy. And I look at, the new innovations that are hitting the market with the startups and how critical these things are in the uptake into the larger strategics is so important. So maybe I'll start there and just say that there's great technology that's coming online. The question is, are the strategics set up, especially the ones that are now spun out, of their original businesses, to embrace it? And I think that some aren't, and some may never. And when I look at the marketplace itself now, going into 2026, 25 has been a good year for transition. 26 is still going to be a transition element, at least the first half. When we look toward the way that the companies are now set up, structured, they definitely, in most cases, on the good side of things, have more of their outright power versus being, we'll call, dictated to. Okay.
So a little bit of independence, some independent decision-making.
Exactly. Which should unleash some of this activity. It really should. But I don't think it's going to be unleashed in a powerful way that you're going to see and recognize at least the first half of 26. It's going to take the remainder of 25 and up through the first half of 26 for those wheels to really get under them. Doesn't matter who it is. Okay. One move causes additional, one cause causes several effects. Let's call it that way. Okay. So a company goes out, they buy a spine line or a spine line that's been spun off, but now they've got to manage that within their own business. And they've got to manage that relative to the other things they already had in their portfolios. Okay. And with that comes that transition. So that's why I say second half of 26 is going to be highly active. The first half is going to be a lot of work being done in the background. Okay. Which sets it up still to be a transition year so that 27 is a year of execution.
I think it's an interesting thesis. I think the other thing we're going to need to see, and we won't see it publicly because some of these are privately held companies, but these spine companies need to post some quarter-on-quarter growth.
Yep.
They need to demonstrate that the market is still a vibrant, growing space to be in for private or public investors to put money into. Otherwise, it's going to continue to be slow.
Right.
I think it's a bit of both. I think the new spun out entities are probably going to be focused in 26 on execution, commercial execution.
Yep.
And
of
then
what they got.
On what they have. And, start shopping maybe a little bit.
Yep.
But focused on posting numbers. And then in 27, assuming that they've had good years, assuming that they're growing, there will be private money, public money available to fund some M&A.
Yes. No, I feel the same way. I feel like, there's two big things that are happening right now around the spine realm. One is right in your face. It's what's happened with all these different divestitures. Okay. But the other one that's happening too is a little bit on the interventional front, interventional pain doc front. And this boundary that's been there for it's right at 20 years now, right? A lot of folks are bullish that it's never going to change, but a lot of folks are like, no, it's going to change. There's going to be an interweaving of the two bodies of individuals being surgeons, neurologists, and interventional pain folks. A lot of training is going to have to come with this. There's no doubt. But I think at the end of the day, I find it hard to believe that it's not going to behave the same way that the cardio market did. The cardiac market was always cardiothoracic surgeons, always, until the interventionalists showed up. And the same battle went down. And then today, if I needed to have something done from a cardiac procedure standpoint, I'm probably going with the least invasive way to get done what needs to get done in the fastest manner. And so I think there's a lot of that's hanging in the balance. There's even an organization, and I can't remember the name of it right now, that is actually bringing together these surgeons on one side, the interventionalists on the other side, from a collaborative standpoint. So it'll be interesting with our guest today as we get this.
I would add to your comment around that. I would go to the most skilled, best trained practitioner.
Period. Yes.
So I think that's where maybe an argument could be made. And that's where the argument is going to be happening between ortho, neuro, traditional surgeons and the pain interventionalists who are starting to shift their practice towards more, let's call it invasive surgery. Anyway, this is going to be a subject that our guest is front and center dealing with. And we'll get into this later, but first, of course, we want to hear more about him. But let's bring on our good friend, David Jansen, CEO of Fusion. David.
Glad to join the jam session. Thanks for having me.
Welcome.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And thanks for the coaching on how to properly cook a turkey with bacon. Before we got on, David gave me the full recipe of how to make a delicious turkey with bacon. And it's going to be delicious, if only because it has bacon.
It's right. At the end of the day, when you finish your turkey and then you still have an entire plate of bacon, it becomes part of your Thanksgiving tradition. You just need to have it. So it's good.
Absolutely. David, it's great to have you. We've been wanting to kind of get you on here for a long time. And this is timely, especially as we've been talking about how the spine market is evolving. And it's evolved rapidly over the past, let's say, 18 months with spin outs and some small acquisitions and so forth. But before we get into that, David, tell us a little bit about you and how your personal journey into entrepreneurship. I think our listeners would like to hear about your story.
Yeah. So, now today I'm CEO of Sail Fusion and been doing this now for a couple of years. I grew up very much as a entrepreneur. I, started off even in high school. I had a family member at, the old school spine tech, and I grew up watching that and said, hey, I want to do this. I want to be in orthopedics, love spine. And man, if I can get into startup, that'd be fantastic. And so I was the real cool, nerdy kid in high school who said, yeah, I want to go to engineering and I want to study this. And at University of Minnesota, studied spine biomechanics. They didn't have a program. I just kind of made one with a bunch of directed research, spent time at HCMC, crunching spines and evaluating Punjabi's research and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But straight out of school, and then it was just rapid development. How can I get involved in making these products? So it was design firm up in Minneapolis, and then got recruited to Synthes Spine on their early days. Did that for a number of years until after the merger. A couple startups where I got a little taste as a young engineer at a startup, and then a little bit of grad school in there to switch teams towards business. Got my MBA, and then helped start the Globus Medical Trauma Division. So I was the first management hire for that. And we built it up, got tons of 510Ks. That was, David Paul, he's built this gigantic company, but I would say that he's been one of the best educational resources for learning how to build, run, start, do anything in a startup. And that was, fantastic. But that was the inspiration, is I had some friends that left Globus and did a startup. And then, I had an opportunity to look at a lot of different technologies there. And one of the technologies that I had come up with just off of surgeon interviews, kind of voice of the customer, is a clinical need. I said, yeah, this is something that I want to run with. David Paul said, hey, no, we don't want to do that. And so, this is something that it was worth putting my, livelihood, finances, everything on the line. And here we are.
That's awesome.
Great.
So I think that's a really compelling story. What was the clinical problem that surfaced through your experiences in big company?
Yeah.
And
So,
how did you take that to the next step?
Absolutely. And there's so many ideas that come, from surgeons all the time. And they're expressing, problems, or, there's the biodesign principle of like, hey, here's new research. And is anybody doing something about that research? And, I had the opportunity. I was listening to hundreds of surgeons every year saying, hey, this is good, this is bad, or I want this, or I don't want that. And, you can be inundated with ideas. The question is how do you find the one idea that's actually worth it? And to me, what that was is I kept on hearing the same problem over and over again. And even for the surgeons that weren't having those problems, they still expressed, yeah, that's an area that needs some correction, that needs some innovation, clearly that's an area that hasn't been, innovated for a number of years. So, okay, we've got both sides of it, that people who are, already believers in this think there needs to be change. People who are having problems would like to see something there. And so then when I started doing that kind of, again, voice of the customer, of proper scientific approach of analysis, and then say, yeah, this has a business case behind it. And then looking at, okay, market data, how big is the market? How much is it growing? Are the numbers there to support it? And, do I have then a thesis that resolves all those problems, all the pain points, or the things that would be pleasers for the people that are already, fans of it? Once I had that body of data, and I had done this several times of like, oh, here's an idea. Maybe I want to run and do this, or here's an idea. Maybe I want to do this. And that entrepreneur kind of like pattern of, ooh, is this the thing? Is this the idea? And then finally there was a day where it's like, this is so obvious, the idea. And, my wife could just hear my, excitement about it. And thankfully she could pay the mortgage. So I could just, go off and do this for a couple of years without taking the pay. But yeah, it was the idea. Hopefully that answers what you're asking.
Hi, everybody. Mike Donahue here. As a medtech leader, you know how important it is to hit the ground running when your new product clears FDA. You need to quickly align and equip your field sales team with training, customer targeting, sales assets, and operational resources that will maximize revenue and traction. Well, at Convey Med, we have the app for that. Convey Connect is the mobile-first launch operating system that ensures your field team is clinically confident, culturally aligned, and operationally efficient from day one. With your customized, white-labeled Convey Connect app, your reps can train on the go, access agentic AI to identify ideal customer targets, query AI agents to provide intelligent answers to clinical and technical questions from your customers, communicate and engage with both company leadership as well as your teammates in the field, and then just so much more. So if you are interested in learning more about Convey Connect, go to our website, conveymed.io, where you can book a demo and we'd be happy to take you through the app. And now back to the show. I think the other variable in that equation is the core technology needed to bring this solution to life. Was that part of the calculus, if you will?
Yeah, because there's always that risk of, do I need to develop something that somewhere down the path of R&D, am I just going to hit a brick wall where this is either too expensive or too difficult or frankly impossible to develop? And that was where we said, okay, well, if we could take kind of like gold standard things that are already proven out, were proven in the 70s and 80s, fixed angle locks, all that kind of stuff. If we could just take things that are already gold standard that we know work and apply them in a new way that addresses a clinical need that hasn't been addressed, then, as long as it addresses the surgeon need, then we've de-risked the R&D, the development. And, there's biomechanics in there. There's all sorts of things. And that's where, A, get as much of a body of knowledge in yourself as you can possibly have. And then B, surround yourself with people like Chris and Mike here that know enough stuff about the industry that can fill all the gaps of all the things you don't know.
Definitely. It's interesting because as I think about cell fusion and the implant technology, the approach, everything that you've just said, right? We're thinking about an SI space that, man, it's hard to believe, but it's approaching 20 years of, we'll call real focus, where prior to that, it was, there was some stuff going on, but nothing like majorly changing the game. What is the biggest thing that you're working to achieve as a mission as it relates to that patient outcome?
Yeah. And at the end of the day, me as CEO, co-founder of this company, there's only so much that what I want to do that's going to matter. At the end of the day, if I'm not solving what a surgeon wants, then I'm just kind of force feeding a solution. But what the surgeons want, that I hear over and over, is we're applying joint fusion all over the body, whether it's cervical cages, lumbar, even as we fuse knees, as we fuse elbows, wrists, fingers, anywhere in the body that we're taking two bones and then we're making them one bone. We have some proven principles of how we do that. You got to carve out the synovium or the joint material that's going to prevent bone growth across it. You got to make sure there's good bleeding bone, it's touching itself, and then it's held rigidly, and then just don't screw up the blood supply surrounding it. And those principles, I mean, we had the first beginnings of that. I mean, you could even argue that back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, we had the nascent parts of it, but then the AO Foundation, probably the 50s, 60s, 70s, all of that really fundamental research on joint fusion came out, and we know exactly what to do. We do it everywhere else in the body. And I kept hearing surgeons say, well, why aren't we doing that to the SI joint? We do it everywhere else. We're just not doing those things when we treat the SI joint. And that was the thesis. And then there's either been bad outcomes or there's frustrations with inconsistencies or whatnot. And so surgeons seem to want this problem solved of, man, wouldn't it be great if we had something that applied those things that we've proven out for 80 years now towards this joint that seems to be in isolation among all other joints. And that was the problem to solve. And, if we talk to surgeons about just the basic science of it, they get really excited. And so I think that's a metric is if you see a problem and you think you have a solution, when you talk about the solution with those same people that are expressing the problem, if a light goes on, it clicks and they say, oh yes, that makes so much sense, then you might have an idea. Do that enough times, prove that out with enough people, and you might have a good solution.
No, that's good. That's good. I think about too, on the front of the surgeon basis in the last 20 some odd years, as we referenced, and thinking on the fact of how many surgeons are comfortable. And as you look at this, because your market specifically and your revenue model is a microcosm of the bigger, okay? But when you, in your day-to-day, how many doctors are really starting to embrace this versus 5 years ago? Are you seeing that market upswing to where the comfort and the time to, we'll say, learn the technique is improving greatly, specifically for sale?
Yeah. So I would say, when I was looking at the market, this had something like a 19% CAGR, is growing rapidly within spine. That's a very rapid growth.
Yeah.
Well above anything else within spine. And, looking at that speaks to a couple things. And the market data gets a little bit more granular that, yes, more patients are getting seen, which means that more patients are getting diagnosed. And so I think that there's better diagnostic criteria. In the kind of the forebears, the beginning of this market of SI, SI Bone did an amazing job creating good diagnostic criteria. And then the societies did an amazing job of adopting that, refining it, and making it, a part of practice. And so I think there's a patient aspect that's growing. But yes, to your point, more and more surgeons are seeing, oh, wow, I have these patients with unresolved sciatica. And I've told them I can't help them. Go off to pain clinic and see if they can help. They're bringing them back. We have one clinician that we know that he's got a backlog of 500 patients that he's seen over the last so many years that he said, oh, I can't do anything about it. And now he's seeing, okay, if I do an SI fusion, those patients get better. So now basically just bringing them in and just treating them. Now, granted, this is a very positive diagnostic. And so if you inject a very small amount of lidocaine into the joint, and you can see that with contrast, it's like 50-50, 4% lidocaine and contrast agent. If it's only in the joint and you get over 75% pain relief, great. You've got a positive SI joint dysfunction. And you're not just kind of conjecturing like maybe it's black disc, maybe it's something else. And if you surgically treat it, these patients get better. And so we're seeing more and more surgeons acknowledging that. And maybe it started with the low man on the totem pole, like, oh, you're the new surgeon at the practice. Guess what? You're getting all of these cases. Yeah. The results of that. And so now you're seeing multiple practitioners with this single practice that are now picking it up and adopting it. So that's where we're seeing it's not just patient growth, it's also surgeon growth.
Great. That's great.
So it's interesting because you are the beneficiary of a market that was developed for you.
Yeah. I mean, in SI bone, you have to say that the Tony Recuperos of the world that have gone out there and built a market, they have all the training, they have the diagnostics, they worked really hard, got the CPT codes, they did all the really hard work. And that's incredible. And so many surgeons have benefited from that. But in the same time, surgeons, they're going out there and they're looking like, okay, what's the next evolution of this? Like we now have expandable cages instead of just PLIF cages. We have porous cages instead of just so you're seeing this innovation, and surgeons are starting to ask, hey, we started to treat these patients. Is there a better way of getting more reliable fusion, more reliable pain relief? And that's where we come in. We're benefiting tremendously because surgeons are asking, how can I do this better? And that's where it's been very helpful. But going back to the previous question of, if you've got a clinical need, but there's an incumbent, you have to be that much more precise of a solution, that much more reliable of a solution, that much more easily adopted of a solution. Because if not, like surgeons don't want to change for just a minor change. They're looking for a step change, a major improvement.
Well, and to that point, there's a big argument out there, man. And with the research I've done over the years, especially in the SI fusion space, I think about this a lot. There is a natural step-off point for a patient that has pain, lower back pain, even the sciatic element of it, to where the natural inclination is, well, it's look at this disc at, L3-4 or L5-S1. And they always come back and they immediately go, well, let's just fuse. Here's a question, and I'm curious on your thoughts on this. I think there's a lot of fusions going on in the lumbar spine that are actually a SI joint problem. Test me on that.
No, preach. Go ahead, man, because I 100% agree. Yeah, I mean, we think that there's good data saying that about 30% of all chronic lower back pain is the SI joint. And I'm one of those lucky people. I decided to jump off a cliff when I was like 21, skiing Jackson Hole, Corbett's Coulier, and 20 feet down, sword in the stone, rolled 100 yards. And now here I am, I get to fly with a tennis ball behind my back because, my SI joint hurts. Or the women that anytime after childbirth, that SI joint can be dysfunctional. And that's 80% of them are women, and the other 20% are maybe idiots like me from skiing. But there's a lot of people that up until I really started researching the space, I just thought I had lumbar. I thought I had L5-S1 or something that in my facets, and I just kind of assumed that, and I could live with it. Thankfully, there's nothing visible. There's nothing radiographic that I could look at. But sure enough, when you start to apply the diagnostic, there's treatments where you can basically just shove your thumb right into the SI joint, and it's the Fortin finger test. And when you do that, and it's like, hey, does that really hurt your joint? Yes, it does. That's one of the provocative tests that you could do that could really prove this out. But those provocative tests, and certainly the positive injection test to diagnose this dysfunction, they weren't part of the algorithm for all until the last 5-10 years.
That's right.
Now we're starting to see it part of it. So yeah, I mourn for all the people that have unnecessary, really invasive surgery. There's no such thing as minor surgery. I don't care if you're getting a microdisc. I don't care what you're getting. There's no such thing as minor surgery.
It's still surgery.
Especially in the spine, which could go south quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think there's tons of people that have gotten it. Thankfully, if, let's say that they did fuse L5-S1, but they still have unresolved pain, this is still something that you haven't burned a bridge, that you can still resolve the SI joint pain. And unfortunately, whenever you fuse lumbar segment, especially L5-S1, or if you have a hip replacement, there's less cushion, or knee replacement, and there's more force going up, there's going to be a natural additional strain applied to the SI joint. And so we know that, if you get lumbar fusion, maybe 10, maybe 20%, probably closer to 10% of those patients are going to go on to get a dysfunctional SI joint. And so it may have exacerbated it, but yeah, there's still a really great opportunity for surgeons that are adopting this as a technology to say, hey, all those patients that just didn't get better for unknown reasons, maybe we can go take a look at them and actually help. And
I got a feeling with the clinical data that's going to come out in the years ahead, even, that it's going to be a simple thought process, unless there's something very obvious in the lower lumbar. There'll be a simple thought process of just freaking start from the bottom and go up if you have to. No pun intended.
It's so easy. To go in and just do a small injection to the SI joint is very simple. That when you're already evaluating the lumbar spine, and it's going to be 70% of the time it'll be lumbar. So we just assume 70% of the time it's lumbar. But if you're L5S1, you should probably check your SI. And, it's not the majority, but it's enough of the patients, and it presents the exact same way that it's probably worth checking.
I've always wanted to ask you these, by the way.
Good. Any opportunity that you and I can chat is always fun.
David, you say on your website, we sort of kicked off the show talking a little bit about the spine market and the engagement with traditional surgeons and pain management interventionalists. You say on your website, Bowtie is exclusively available to neuro and orthopedic spine surgeons. Talk about that tension a little bit. Like, what led you to that decision and why?
Yeah, I mean, it is a tension. The industry is certainly in transition. Chris and I have had long conversations on this at various meetings and getting together. It is certainly a transition, and there are a lot of market forces at play, and we are not the arbiters of that. We're not going to be the ultimate judge, jury, executioner of it. The way that we think about this is that for a spine surgeon, when they do a procedure and they're going in, they're going to do any kind of discectomy. Like if you're thinking of a PLIF cage or a TLIF, or you're going to be doing pedicle screws. There's a lot of different things that when you get in there, you got to extract yourself. You need to be able to pull yourself out. You need to be able to, if you hit a nerve, if you tear the dura, if hit an artery, you need to be able to fix that. And that's stat. It's not something you just package up and send off, especially when, there's good data that says that, if you like the lateral approach, they're now saying, hey, have 3+ units of blood on hand. Because if you hit gluteal artery, if you hit one of these critical things that are in the way from a lateral approach, and there's been 3 deaths at least of hitting into your iliac artery or whatnot from lateral approach, that if that's the risk, you probably need a surgeon that can bail you out. And so that's our personal stance, is that, because this is an invasive, we're carving out the entire joint, we're putting fixation, you got to have good imaging of the pelvis, you got to know the osseous pathways in the pelvis. It's not a difficult surgery. We just had a surgeon do a procedure in 16 minutes, in terms of the actual implantation. And, it's not difficult, but if something were to happen, and we've designed around to make sure you avoid it, there's checks and all that, but we wouldn't want to be in a situation where there's a non-surgeon who can't fix those. Mm-hmm. There's also the question of what's the next surgery? Have you burned a bridge? I really love the concept of, if you're going to do a surgery, be thoughtful about, okay, well, if the patient doesn't get better, what am I doing next? Mm-hmm. Do I have to remove this hardware? Am I able to put in other hardware adjacent to it? Am I, what's my next clinical path? And, I'm all for do the least invasive, least, critical surgery first, so you're not overdoing it. But there's certainly a situation where, what is the next couple steps? And surgeons, I think, are prepared for what those next steps are.
Mm-hmm. It's good. It's rich.
It's an interesting market, and it's changing. I mean, I was just telling you this story. I mean, we went out to dinner with the surgeon just a couple weeks ago, and he wasn't aware that about 40% of SI fusions or SI procedures are being done by interventional pain docs or anesthesiologists, whatnot. And he was pretty shocked. And so I don't think that very many spine surgeons are aware that there are non-surgeons that are doing these cases. And it comes as a shock to them. He actually called his rep immediately and said, hey, are you covering any of these? And, it was an awkward situation for that rep, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. That's the big
question.
question.
Cautionary tale with that, or is there risk? I mean, is there any analogies to vertebroplasty, kyphoplasty that worries you a little bit? Because wasn't that some of the similar dynamic?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this over and over. I mean, we talked, Chris was talking about his cardio experience, as maybe if you want to reflect on what you experienced on that side. But you've also seen this with, trauma docs, with podiatrists. You've seen this, in a lot of different areas. I would just say that, during this period of flux, until there's been the really intentional training, until there's been, the societies have figured this out, the surgeons have figured this out, it's not on the company's side to dictate policy of, who should be doing this. And so from our stance, we're taking, who's the most equipped, who's got the most surgical training hours, from an academic institution to be able to do this, and to us, that's surgeons.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just for the audience, just to be clear, I haven't had any cardiac event.
Cardiac experience in your industry experience. There you
go. Yeah. It's just
like talking about bacon at the beginning of the show.
Yes. Yeah. It's just the reflection of what happened in that space. And then is there the possibility the same thing happens here in time? And I think there's the possibility in time, right? I mean, it's just like it's the seasoning of and the realization of the training that is necessary, right? Especially to take on a procedure, right? That's not, we'll call it super duper MIS, but something that lends itself to great detail of how to treat that synovial space and how to treat the getting to the bleeding bone, right? To your point. And that's still carpentry.
Yeah.
Right.
And to your point about like kyphoplasty, I mean, that is a really good example. Kyphoplasty was originally designed and can be done without a scalpel. You're basically just going down. You've got a Jamshidi, you've got a balloon catheter, and there's not much more besides that. And interventional pain radiologists, they are trained on where are you, how do you get this needle to where it needs to be, and kyphoplasty really lined up well with the training for interventionalists. Whereas I think spine surgeons, it's the difference between who's using the scalpel, who's using the needle. And spine surgeons, they work with scalpels. And so we designed this because this is a procedure that requires a scalpel. We designed it for spine surgeons.
Makes total sense. Talk a little bit about, David, the development of the company. You guys are another one of the graduates, I don't know if graduates is the right term, of a venture studio, Core Medical Ventures. Talk a little bit about your experience in developing a product via venture studio.
Yeah, so this is a little bit easy because these were guys that I knew, I want to say like 20 years ago. So when I was at Synthes, a couple of the guys that ended up founding Core Medical, they got acquired into Synthes, got to work with them closely. I saw that these were some of the best engineers I had ever met. And I've stayed in touch with them ever since they left Synthes, I left Synthes. And knew that they were doing core. I really loved the model. My first internship in undergrad and my first job out of school was a development firm. So I understood the model. I understood, like the economics of not having to build out an entire company around you during these really kind of like questionably funded days when you're just trying to like get as much money as possible to go towards R&D and regulatory and getting out there. And so I knew Core, I knew their model, I knew what they were doing. And so, yeah, I think, kind of a graduate portfolio company, whatever you want to say, Core has been a fantastic partner because when I had this thesis for what the clinical need was for SI fusion, what eventually became Bowtie and Sail, I had that thesis and I had approached Core and they said, well, hey, actually, we've got these 3 surgeons that have already approached us with a similar need, but we haven't come up with the right solution. And so we joined together. They had some existing IP. We brought in some additional IP. And we then were able to develop this, raise some funds, develop very quickly, extremely quickly. Like these are the things that development firms pride themselves on, is that you're doing fast development. And both of you have been in the M&A room a lot. You know that there's so many things that you can do that are missteps that can screw up the entire company. Not having a good quality system, not doing the right validations, not having, the list is 100-point long, right? So if you're not doing those things well, you can really shoot yourself in the foot. And that's what having an incredibly good quality system that one of their companies already been acquired by a J&J, for example, that we all know has a very stringent quality system. So knowing that there's these good factors has been incredibly encouraging. So we built that up. We had this initial idea, some funding, got through V&V regulatory, got through the FDA. And, as we're building out, I'm building up my company. They're kind of building up the resources that I don't want to have a W-2 for. I have my W-2s that are just for 60 plus hours a week worth of work that I know that I'm going to need for years and years. The things that are transient or that flex, go up and down, that's where I'm able to flex using them. And that's been really nice. So they're doing distribution, billing, accounting, engineering, regulatory, quality. Like it's a lot of things that otherwise I don't want to have in-house. And for me to replicate those, I've hired a good quality consultant. They're extremely expensive. And to develop a brand new quality system from scratch versus fitting into something that's already been proven good. And so that's a really good partner up to this point.
No doubt.
Yeah, no doubt. I think it's a really good model for surgeons, entrepreneurs, R&D entrepreneurs like yourself, or both together, to bring new technology to market. So we applaud Core Medical for what they've built.
No doubt.
It's
great partners, good guys too. It's been fun to work with friends that I've had for many years that we now get to dive into the deep end and do this in real time.
Well, as they say, sometimes it's the journey, not the destination, and being on a journey with your friends and guys you trust and enjoy working with is all part of the satisfaction that comes with building a successful company. So where does Sale go now? You guys raising money? Are you getting ready to go full tilt commercialization?
Yeah.
What's the next step for David Jansen and the team at Sale Fusion?
Oh, it's a startup, so we're doing everything. That's the goal. But no, what we are doing right now is we're raising an equity round. That's going to be funding. We've got a lot of platform products. We've got a single product, but right now, where this is a platform, it enables a lot more. And so fundraising, to do larger scale development. The bigger thing, as you guys both know, is a company is defined by commercialization. And so we've been very much in kind of early alpha, just working with our friendly surgeons, the folks that are close to the company. We're just barely starting to open that up to new surgeons. But we have sets, we have inventory, and so it's expanding that. It's what would happen if we had twice as many sets, and folks that could go out and talk to folks that don't know me personally or that aren't in our Rolodex. And what we've seen is in the few sites that, let's call them like maybe beachheads, where we first got in with a single really great surgeon in one location, then they start getting great results, and their partners say, hey, that's kind of cool. We'd be curious about that. And so then the partners start using it. And that's been our metric so far, is like, how well are we at a single location able to get the partners at that practice? How much are we able to just go right down the street because they're friends and they talk and they say, oh, hey, that's great. And then, we maybe do like a preceptorship or proctor or whatnot, or training at minimum, where the surgeons talk. And then we can show that, yeah, this model actually works. And, surgeons that know me from Adam are all of a sudden interested in this technology. And then when they start doing it, they get great results. And so, funding makes that grow beyond, a couple cities to all over the country. And that's where it's probably our next steps. And then research, I should say, down. We are, anything medical, if you're not leaning into research, you're really doing our industry a disservice, because our entire industry, all of our customers are, their entire careers are based on the idea of research-driven decision-making. And if we're not putting research into our products, then we're just not doing our job. So we dedicate, I don't even want a percentage to it because it's probably, way more than I think, but we put a lot of funding into clinical registry, retrospectives, prospectives, case studies, finite element, basic science. We're putting a lot of effort in that, and we'll just continue to grow on that front as well.
That's an investment in the long run. Super important.
Definitely.
And it's a really interesting dynamic. As we talk about, kind of how startups get to the space, we thankfully have multiple CPT codes that apply for our product. And they've already existed thanks to, that kind of the beginnings of this industry. But without research, you're not getting CPT codes. You're not getting into large hospitals. We were thankfully, this is a very safe and easy procedure to be done in an ASC. Patients get up and walk day of and feel better. And so because of that, we're getting into ASCs. A lot of those are surgeon owned. The VAC is a lot quicker. And so, but if you want to get into large academic institutions, you need to be able to show that this has merit, and that's through research. And so we're leaning into that every day.
And if your intent is to eventually get acquired, it's all that data that the acquirer is going to literally lean on to say, prove me where I'm wrong here, or prove me where I'm right. And I think that's the thing that is so important. You're doing the heavy lifting now, right? And I think that means the world to the outcomes for the patients, to the satisfaction of the surgeons, and to the eventual purchase of the business.
We have a lot of stakeholders, don't we? Like med tech is not simple. We don't just single like B2C, kind of deal. It's very much the number of stakeholders that we have to satisfy. And you're not even factoring in, the insuring payers or the hospital administrators, the like the materials manager. There's so many people that we are trying to work with. But yeah, that research, what it does, and I don't think it's just data on clinical outcomes. Let's not ignore it. It's absolutely critical, but the amount of data that becomes relevant for this. And, if let's say that you're at that final table, you're talking to a large strategic. If you don't have really good analysis of your CRM and being able to say, hey, our data shows that this is what the typical adoption cycle is, or this is the typical customer acquisition cost. If you just say, I don't know, we do a couple labs and then they start using it after a month, like that doesn't fly. You need to have really good analysis to say, yeah, if you take me out of the equation and you give this to 500 reps at one of the large strategics, how much could you reliably multiply this across those reps today?
That's right.
And, without a large ramp up, and, going back to the initial conversation about the large strategics right now, I think if I were to look at a crystal ball, it's going to be immediately accretive acquisitions. They're going to be working to spin up their R&D engine, but realize it's really hard as a big company to do R&D and do things that are innovative. It's really difficult. That's why I left J&J. That's why I left big companies. So they're going to then have to bring on maybe more innovative early stage technologies. But I think with private equity playing as it is, accretive is going to be the name of the game. But they're going to want to do land grabs. They're going to want to do, maybe, optional or structured deals. So that's what I think is, my own personal, opinion. I'd be curious your thoughts on, what type of companies the big strategics are looking for.
Yeah, I can tell you that they definitively want things more de-risked than ever.
Yep.
They definitely really appreciate revenue, although they may not buy you for your revenue. What they're buying you for is your proof of acceptance and the duplicity of what you've done, right? To your point. And I think one of the biggest things right now is that they got to make right moves. And there are only so many shots on goal they're going to take in the course of a 12-month period of time, if you can even call it 12 months. I've seen some do a bunch in 12 months, and I've seen some not do anything in 3 and 5 years. And so as I watch the market and the fervor, I think there is going into 26 and 27, these are going to be years we're going to look back on and go, do you remember when? I really do believe that, because it is pent up demand, but they're not going to risk a bad decision in the name of, we got to do something. They are putting methodology behind their decision-making, probably now more than ever. Okay.
They can't afford not to.
They can't. They can't.
Discipline. Yeah. So the acquirers are going to be more disciplined, meaning you have to be more disciplined. And it sounds like you are. You've got a clean QMS, a tight DHF. You've got clinical data. You're building a commercial playbook that can be scalable. You've got a solid, we didn't talk about this, but I'm assuming you have solid intellectual property already. You have the ingredients that the companies are looking for, that they can take it and scale quickly.
Yep.
So
I'd say that there's another de-risk in there that, we haven't necessarily talked about is, spine. If you look at orthopedics in general, there's been different spaces that have had a lot of innovation. And, I'm not going to name names, but there's certain areas within orthopedics that have more gimmicky innovation, more gadgets that maybe don't, have a big clinical need. It's more of a solution looking for a problem kind of thing.
Right.
And I don't think that's going to fly. That's, in this space where there's so much risk, there's so much need for de-risking. Another element of de-risking is making sure that the technology makes scientific sense, that there's a pull need, that surgeons are saying, I need to solve this problem, and this is actually a tangible issue in my life. I'm not just looking for a gadget. There's a lot of gadgets that wouldn't pass that test. And, when you're based on really solid, kind of like baseline research and evidence, then surgeons see that. And that surgeon is going to be the primary arbiter of like, hey, does this actually solve a scientific need? And if it does, great. And that's where I think the large strategics are going to say, hey, we can't risk, getting a gimmick. We're only going to acquire the technologies that are based on something real.
Yeah.
100%. Well, David, this has been great. Congratulations on everything that you've built.
This is good. I need a clap track in my own personal life. This is good. I'm just going to have a button next to my desk every time.
It just follows you around.
You don't need that or that.
I'll take a soundboard. Yeah, send it on over. I'll take that anytime.
Well, David, thanks for joining. We're super proud and excited to see what sales going to do. I think Chris and I would agree that you guys have a bright future ahead, and we'll be watching you closely. And of course, we're here to help you in any way that we can. So thank you so much.
I'm sure I'll see you guys at LSI and all the usual places. So appreciate it as well.
Good.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks everybody. Thanks everybody. And thanks for joining the MedTech Jam Session with Chris and Mike D. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.